And the U.S. President Donald Trump has said that the most trade deals negotiated under the threat of his tariffs remain valid despite a Supreme Court ruling that struck down the sweeping levies. Speaking to reporters in Washington, Trump insisted that the India deal is on, signaling that negotiations with India are still intact. He added that while the court invalidated certain tariffs, his administration would pursue alternative legal pathways to maintain trade pressure. Earlier, the Supreme Court of the United States ruled 6-3 that Trump exceeded his authority by imposing broad Liberation Day tariffs under a law intended for national emergencies. For this conversation, I'm joined by a Global Policy Analyst, Professor Izielen Agbon, as well as Public Affairs Analyst, Ejike Okpa. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for being here. I'll start with you, Professor Agbon. The ruling, analysts say, invalidates the tariff that had become centerpiece of Trump's administration, his economic and foreign policy, in fact. But he seems to be fighting back. What happens now beyond the expected fund reform claims?
Well, President Trump had used an existing law, a 1977 International Emergency Economic Power Act, that allowed the president to impose a tariff. And the Supreme Court said that was an overextension of his powers, because the powers to impose a tariff, according to the U.S. Constitution, Article 1, Section 8, is a power that should be exercised by the Congress. So the Supreme Court says Trump overreached his power, and that all the tariffs that were imposed in April 2025 by Trump were illegal. And there is $150 billion that have been accumulated from those import tariffs that the Supreme Court didn't say how they will refund it, but they probably have to refund it to U.S. business and co. But Trump says that he's going to use alternative laws like the 1974 Trade Act to reimpose a 10% tariff on all countries for 5 months. But the 1974 law is more restrictive than the powers that Trump was usurping under the 1977 International Emergency Economic Power Act, in which he was like raising the tariff for China to 125%, India to 100%, Mexico to 50%. The Supreme Court says he cannot do that.
Okay, Mr. Okpa, the Trump administration, Trump himself had said this decision will damage the U.S. economy. What is the likelihood of this happening?
Sorry, what the likelihood of what that happening? The tariff damaging U.S. economy?
Damage U.S. economy, because that's what he is saying on his Truth Social, among the fact that he wants to fight this with other legal aspects. And you can just add to that his optimism that other deals that was held before the Supreme Court judgment remains valid.
It's not going to damage the U.S. economy. It's just a shock. It's a shock that the Supreme Court did what the Supreme Court did. But if you had listened to the dissenting views, he said that the presidency has an alternative way to do this tariff thing. I think it's unfair on the U.S. because when China decided to impose tariff for other countries, they don't go through the process America goes through. So we are the only ones that try to have transparency, invite the Congress, or the Congress weighs in. Other countries just do it because their president, does it or has the right to do it. I want to question, the use of the word usurp. The president did not usurp the law. The president used a law that he felt was going to give him the right to do what he did. And if the Supreme Court comes back to say, no, you shouldn't have, that does not make it illegal. It just makes it unconstitutional. Then he goes to the next alternative. So there's always an alternative. So as for this damaging U.S. economy, no. The money that is already in the Treasury is not going to be refunded to anybody. It could be channeled into some other stuff. But again, it's not the end of it. Just another way for the president and his leadership people to rethink what is the next move, and then they're going to take that next move.
Okay, Prof, according to Associated Press, the ruling sorry? Prof, can you hear me, please?
Tariff is yes, I can hear you. Tariff is a tax. It's an import tax, and it is the citizen that pay. That's why President Trump has to give a surplus and a subsidy of almost $15 billion to American farmers, because the last tariff almost destroyed a lot of the economy. And basically, when a Supreme Court says a presidential decision was an overreach, it means the president, according to the highest court in the land, did not have the power to do what he did. And therefore, the alternative that under the Trade Act, Section 122, only gives him the power to go up to 15% for 150 days or 5 months. And that is what he's trying to do now, rather than using tariff as a tool of foreign policies. So, for instance, most countries, there are trade deficits. There is, from an economic point of view, that trade barriers do not really lead to international growth. And for a long time, U.S. were the one advocating for free trade and the removal of trade barriers. But Trump does not believe in that. He feels there's a lot of trade deficit that U.S. have, and there's a need for a balance of trade with most countries in the world. Yes, you were going to ask me a question, sorry.
Yes, well, I mean, I guess you wanted to speak to that. That was why I let you go ahead. But Mr. Okpa, you said that Trump made his decisions using laws that he thought, you went ahead to explain a little of that to us. But I read that the decision, the American media is reporting, is expected to trigger a wave of refund claims from companies seeking to recover billions paid under the now invalidated tariffs. Some companies were mentioned. In 40 seconds, if you can, will this have any teeth? We heard some companies are already preparing their cases.
Well, again, like I said, we just had the Supreme Court ruling, and he said he shouldn't have done it. So now, if money is already in the Treasury and they have a legitimate reason to use the law that the Supreme Court has ruled in their favor to request a refund, I'm sure the Treasury Department with the administration will come back and decide how to do that. But the point about the tariff, every country has a right to decide what goods comes in. Trump has, America is not a dumping ground. America shouldn't open their doors to everybody. Sometimes, we have a FTA, that's a free trade agreement. Not every country has a free trade agreement with America. In fact, in all of Africa, only Morocco has one. So all I'm just saying is that this is just another hiccup in the process of tariff. It's not the end of it. The plan B the president spoke about is we'll see what that plan B is, and then we keep going.
All right. Gentlemen, as always, thank you for obliging us tonight.
Well, thank you for having me.
Thank you.